Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Raymond Karam. I'm the Senior Director of Programs and Outreach here at the Arab Gulf States Institute. Thank you for joining us on our second day of our Gulf Art and Culture Symposium. It's been a wonderful undertaking here for us since we are focused mostly on policy, economy, and politics, to be able to bring in this cultural aspect and societal aspect into our conversation. Tell you a little bit more about this the dynamic art and culture scene in the region. We are joined by these amazing, over 3 days, amazing artists, curators, scholars from the region and beyond for this conversation. I think all of you have seen our programs already that are on the chairs. So you'll see the remnants of yesterday's exhibit here on our walls with Ibtisam Abdulaziz, the Emirati artist, who is with us here today as well. So you could feel free to speak to her after the conversation today. This evening, after this panel, this evening we'll have a film screening, an Emirati film, Nearby Sky, and we'll also feature a conversation with the director following the film. And then tomorrow we'll have our closing panel, which will take place at Busboys and Poets, focusing more on cultural outreach outside of the Gulf. We'll also be joined by a wonderful jazz musician, Tariq Yemeni. He's a late announcement addition to the program, but we are so glad to have him with us. And I hope all of you can join us tomorrow, this evening, and tomorrow as well. Now I just want to hand over the panel to our wonderful moderator, Dr. Mariët Westermann, who is the Executive Vice President of the Carnegie Mellon Foundation and formerly of NYU Abu Dhabi as well. So she's bringing a lot of knowledge from the region as well as from her current work. So Mariët, please.
Marhaba, good afternoon. Very pleased to see all of you, and thank you, Raymond, for the kind introduction. Welcome all to the first Gulf Arts Symposium in Washington, and possibly the US, I think it may be. And I'm very grateful, especially to Ambassador Marcel Wabba for hosting us and having us here, and to all of you for coming and for these wonderful participants. This panel, the second panel of the symposium, is dedicated to the following proposition. I'm going to read it. Arts and culture in the Gulf have undergone a transformation under the influence of a new media-savvy generation and state investment in new arts industries. This panel maps out the new dynamism in the arts that the region is experiencing. And I'm glad we have these really dynamic people who will do that with us. Before I introduce them, let me say a few words about my personal experience of this topic. As Raymond alluded, I have a past history with, and that's an ongoing history, with an institution I love called New York University Abu Dhabi, NYU Abu Dhabi. And that's a full-scale university built around the American model of a liberal arts college, but in the Gulf and really very conscious of being in the region and being in a very special historic crossroads of the world with great importance for developments today, obviously. I worked on the launch of that project as the first provost of it from early 2007 until we opened in September 2010. And even in those early years, before we had students and recruited a lot of faculty to the region and staff, we were very aware that a university like NYU Abu Dhabi is itself a cultural agent, quite apart from being an education center and a traditional university for the 21st century. Any university in any town, in any region, in any country, if they are really good and fully deploying all the resources that they can bring to their place, they are not just for the students who are there or for the faculty who teach or for the staff who are part of the institution. They bring, by the intellectual capital that they can concentrate on their campuses and in their programs and in the very people who they bring there, they can be a tremendous resource for their communities in which they're situated. And also, very importantly, and this is still true and perhaps even more true in the digital age when you can get a lot of information and even courses online, how the university behaves in that community and how it brings in the members of the community to be a resource to it is increasingly important. And we were really aware of that NYU Abu Dhabi could not succeed if it was just going to be a great college for those students who come there, about 500 new students a year who come there every year. Eventually it will be 4,000 who will be there in residence at any one time. But already before we opened, we were very aware that the kind of programming that the Arab Gulf States Institute does here is precisely the sort of thing that NYU should begin to bring to the UAE and Abu Dhabi, and that also was an opportunity for many people in the community who might never attend the university, might never send a kid there, might never take courses there themselves or work there, could benefit and also contribute to the effort of building a major, important and ambitious effort to build a world-class university. And part of that outreach that we did in the very early days before we ever had a university, we had a research institute, the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute, that brought this kind of programming and continues to this day, involving our faculty, artists, scholars, scientists from all around the world. And at the time, we also thought it was really important that as one of these new institutions in Abu Dhabi, we participate in the great project, the great initiative of Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed and the country really, to build cultural institutions and arts institutions, because universities themselves have arts programs. We had Maya Allison of the New York University Abu Dhabi Art Gallery here last night, moderating the first panel. Her gallery and her outreach efforts are part, along with the Performing Arts Center, are themselves kind of an art institution within the university, and again, within that dynamic, these dynamic developments we'll be talking about today. I will just mention one of the programs that we hosted. This was in April 2010, where we really felt we had to contribute to the thinking about what these museums were going to be. The Louvre Abu Dhabi, the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, what could they be? How could we imagine them as something new? And I was always very fond of saying to my colleagues from NYU in New York, who were sometimes a little skeptical and said, well, how are you going to build a real university where there hasn't been a really strong international one and only local ones? How are you going to do that? We won't be able to do X, Y, and Z. They were always very fond of pointing out to me what we couldn't do in Abu Dhabi. And I used to say, now that's okay, and we need to deal with that. And freedom of academic expression and research is really important, and we'll work on all that. That's all understood. But now let's flip the question and ask, what can we do in Abu Dhabi that we can't do in New York? And it turned out there were lots of things, and the university has been doing them ever since. And so we thought that those were also good questions to ask about the museums, and they really need to be thought about and talked about hard. And so one of my favorite events was a conference called Art Museums Here and Now. The question of what art museums are in 2010, here and now, in the Gulf, but also elsewhere in the world, because every museum struggles with the question of relevance today, in the digital era, in a global connected era, in an era of great intercultural strife as well as growing understanding. These dynamics are everywhere. And so we had a conference that I co-organized with Philippe de Montebello, who was then the outgoing director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And Philippe was supposed to start this conference. We invited museum directors from all over the world, and also all of the local players and Gulf players to participate. And he gave the opening address. And of course, the Metropolitan Museum, what greater museum can one think of in the world, right? It's so arrived. It just seems like it's the ultimate museum of all time in a way. And he started by showing a few slides of old photographs from 1870 and the first location of the Metropolitan Museum in this very humble little townhouse. And he talked about this museum, and I'm going to quote what he said, because I have this handy reference here that I will get to in a minute. He said, okay, so in 1870 in New York, there essentially was no art, no collectors, no patrons, and no money. The Met was a museum that was created like parthogenesis, like birth out of nothing, right? Out of nothing, out of aspirations and ambition. And that, of course, was incredible to think about, because that was 1870. 10 years later, the museum had gotten a sense of where it was going to be on its final destination on Fifth Avenue in that grand building. And only 20 years later, in 1902, did that building that you all know finally open, and there was some art to look at in there. 30 years. In fact, they started talking about the museum in 1866, so 36 years it took before you had a really sense of an institution of heft. And I thought it was wonderful that he told the story, because it gave us all a sense of sometimes it's also, no matter how dynamic you are, good to be a little bit patient with yourself. 36 years, that's kind of almost as old as the country of the UAE. So that seemed a good example. The other thing that he cited a little bit is that in the early years when the Met started collecting, those very same things that were said about the Gulf. What do these people think? They're collecting all this great art. How are they going to take care of it? Nobody will want to know about it. Nobody knows anything there about art. These are the kinds of things that were being said, quite critical things in France, in this country, elsewhere. And those very same words you can read in article after article from about 1890 to 1930 when the Met was buying, including in my own country, the Netherlands, where some of the greatest Dutch art was bought because the Dutch people weren't taking care of it, to be totally honest. And so this critique is hard to hear. You have to kind of live through it. You have to sort of deal with it and engage with it. But I think every ambitious new institution that's going to draw major cultural resources to it, as I think these institutions have every right to do if they can, comes with responsibilities. But I mean, you just have to sort of work that through. And I think an institute and a symposium like this helps with that. So that's my personal perspective. This is how the panel is going to go. We're going to hear from our 4 speakers. Each will speak for about 6 to 8 minutes. There will be some video, there will be slides. It will be very lively, I think. They will talk about an aspect of the Gulf region arts and cultural activity that's of special interest and knowledge to them. And with an emphasis, I've asked them to talk not just about the opportunities, but also the challenges, so we can have sort of honest exchanges about them. We will then dig a little deeper, probably amongst ourselves, talk a little bit, and also dig a little deeper, but also open it up to all of you with questions and comments. I will briefly introduce the panelists. You have wonderful biographies for them, but I just want to highlight a few of their special qualities and interests. And I'm very happy that the panel takes us from Oman to Saudi Arabia, to the UAE, and back to Saudi Arabia again. So this is really a nice range. And from the traditional to the contemporary, as you'll hear. We will start with Aisha Stoby. She is from Oman, an Omani art historian, trained all in London at the Royal College of Art, as well as the School of Oriental and African Studies, the famous SOAS, where she's currently obtaining a PhD, focused on modern art movements in the Gulf. Important topic. She was on the planning team for the Oman National Museum and also has established the art foundation Al-Fan Yatahadat, which I probably mispronounced just now, Art Speaks, and we will hear about her interests. Then we'll turn to Ahmad, who is to her right there, Ahmad Angawi, Associate Director of Al-Makmat Foundation, which is a cultural institution that helps preserve and revive Hijazi heritage. So the more traditional arts. And he was very well prepared for that with a very interesting dual background, I think. A bachelor's in industrial design from the Pratt Institute in New York. But he also then pursued a master's degree in London at the Prince's School of Traditional Arts in teaching and making traditional art work. And indeed, as part of the Makmat Foundation work, he also is a program director of the House of Traditional Arts in the historical district of Jeddah. So he will talk a little bit about that. Then we turn to Hanan, to my right here, Hanan Zayed Worrell, who is a non-resident fellow here. She's frequently in the States at the Arab Gulf States Institute, and who is the author of something that I hope all of you will have already picked up, and if not, will before you leave. I quoted from this just now. She conveniently had that Philippe de Montebello quotation ready for me there. A wonderful publication on the UAE's emergence as a hub for contemporary art, which she has written and just published as part of her residence fellowship here. I can say so much about Hanan because I've known her a long time. She's my oldest friend in the UAE. And I will just say that her range is truly millipedic. She can do almost anything, I feel. And it ranges from planning the expansion of the International Airport of Abu Dhabi and really executing that project to being the senior representative for the Guggenheim in Abu Dhabi, but really she is a resource to anyone who comes to that country and needs anything. When I lived there with my still relatively young family, whenever we were sort of saying, well, where is the dry cleaner and who knows a dentist and how will we know how to behave at this dinner party, my sons were in the habit of saying, call Hanan, Mom, call Hanan. And we would. So that's Hanan. And then bringing us to the close of the formal presentations is Noor Aldabbagh, who is the founder, a curator, and the founder of a curatorial platform called Manaf Sajil, which I think she will talk about, which it really has the goal of stimulating this further appreciation, this sort of grassroots interest and knowledge of art and design in the Gulf. She was trained undergraduate at Harvard in visual and environmental studies, and also has a business degree a master's degree from the Stoby Institute of Art in London. And her most recent work, which I think you're going to say quite a bit about and shows about, is the Banafashil Open Studio at the National Museum in Riyadh, which happened in April just now. So this is a great roundup, and I think to the panelists I would say, if you want to see what goes on the screens, we should feel free to sit there in the front, because we don't want to miss what each other is saying. But anyway, with that, let us start with Aisha. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Can everyone hear me? Well, it's wonderful to be here today. My designation on my plaque is LMAF, which is the London Middle East Art Festival. But today I'm here more independently, and in particular as an Omani. My background is in curating. I've worked independently, but also have had the great pleasure to work on projects under our Ministry of Culture and in various spaces around Muscat, which I'll talk about today. I'm currently a full-time PhD student researching modern art movements and communities in the GCC. And both as a curator and as a researcher, I've had the privilege of formal and informal conversations with many of the participants here this week. And it's always been apparent to me that we have far more in common in the Gulf than we have that divides us, particularly in the area of culture. And the more interviews I conduct, the more archives I access, the more this becomes apparent, and particularly in community building, which is something I'm going to talk a bit about today within the arts. So we have shared history, we have shared culture, we have common content, changing mediums, and in artistic change, more recently, we have collective building and capacity, very healthy competition, I think. We serve as friendly catalysts for each other, and we complement and push each other forward. But having said all this about community, I noticed I'm the only participant from Oman here this week. So I thought I would talk a bit on the few minutes I have on Oman using the theme of today's symposium, which is ways in which medium and new dynamism has changed artist communities within the GCC. So if you're speaking about arts in the Gulf, or arts in Oman, sorry, you have to start with Anwar Sonia, who is known as our godfather of Omani art. He started in the 1970s. The date on this continues to be debated, what we call the Youth Studio, which became formalized in 1980. And this was a studio that was a workspace, that was a space of common communication that provided free materials for whoever it was that wanted to learn. For those of us who are here to make comparisons to the UAE, he's our Abdul Qadir al-Rais, he's our Rab Hara Munira Mosli, he's our equivalent of that generation. And some of the people he taught include Rabha Mahmoud, and one of the reasons I'm starting with these artists is to talk about how things have changed. So Rabha, for example, used to paint in her home with materials that people brought her from abroad because we didn't have art supply shops. And her medium were things that she saw around her. So here we see images of formal dress that people would wear in the house. A lot of these are things which can be looked at as social history, because these are things that were seen around us that don't actually exist today in the same way that they did then. Someone else who was taught by Anwar is Maryam Zajali, who opened our Fine Arts Society, and within the span of 7 years, the rest of the Gulf states, all of us opened Fine Arts Societies together, so there's a nice historic example of friendly competition and catalyst that happened from then. And one of the people that was active in the Youth Studio and at the Fine Arts Society is an artist named Hassan Mir. So when we start talking about integration of medium into a society, and in particular new media, he came here to the States. He studied in Savannah. He did his BA and MA and came back thinking, right, we need to move away from painting and sculpture, and we need to start talking about video. We need to start talking about conceptual art. I went away, I learned all these new things, and I want to bring it back. And he decided to start a collective called The Circle. This is the Circle statement. And I'm going to skip ahead to 2 Circle exhibitions in particular that he organized. And at the time, there weren't that many formal spaces around Muscat, so he decided to take to the streets. He thought that he would take whatever exhibition spaces were available at the time. He took the souk, he took areas on the Corniche, he took different areas around the city, and made pop-up shows. So this is the 2005 exhibition of The Circle, which took place at the Culture Club. He stripped down all the walls, all the rooms, and made it into a really beautiful, interesting exhibition space. This was one of 5 spaces around the city that was engaged. This is a work called Ambiguity, which talks about what it was like coming back and having a conversation with himself as someone from Savannah and himself as someone who is in Muscat on what it is that it feels like to be there. There's also lots of small elements here. For example, the goldfish in the bowl is supposed to be his relationship with women and how it is that that's changed. It's supposed to be a symbol for this. And all the small details all have a sort of vernacular or language and what it is that they mean. Other ideas or dreams that he had when he came back, parallels of where it is that he sits now. After bringing in these new mediums, how it is that he could actually show his dreams. So now that we're talking about things like video art, now that we're talking about sound installations, having people actually be able to experience what it feels like to be in his thoughts and these shifting changes. That earlier artist I showed you, Anwar Sonia, joined this group. Of course he did. He was the godfather. He was the teacher of all of them. And this is a piece he made for this exhibition called Fatma, which was after he went to the UAE to do a documentary on a woman who was starting a performing arts center there. And he stayed with her for 1 week, talking about what it is that the Performing Arts Center might look like, her contributions. And as part of the trip, they went to a fortune teller together. And the fortune teller said, "You're going to live a long life, do all sorts of interesting things." And she passed away 3 days later. So he was with her during this time. Yeah, and this is of particular relevance to Oman because there's quite a lot of mysticism. There's an area called Bahla where they say some of the jinn are supposed to have originated from. So this was known as a sort of warning of being too superstitious and things like this for this exhibition. This is called A New Flavor of Freedom by Baduriami. She showed it in her exhibition, which was in particular using new forms to show different ways in which women's empowerment has existed in different societies, how it is that we evolve, the different roles that we play. These are installation shots of the Beit Muzna gallery of some of the things which I've just shown you, and parallel programming. So there were poets, there were performance artists. This was something that completely changed the scope and scene of what it is that we know in Muscat today. Moving forward 2 years later to the next Circle exhibition. This is the Corniche, which is in Matra. We saw the entrance of the Corniche having a huge exhibition sign, having people that were coming to go and buy their incense or whatever it was, telling them there's going to be an exhibition there for the next month. So there were photos going outside leading into the entrance. These are by Camille Zakaria, who's actually a Lebanese Bahraini artist. And at this stage, he started bringing in artists from the rest of the GCC. So Ibtisam is here today. I know she's a very good friend of Hassan's, and we're going to see also a few other artists from all of our countries that started to become involved. This is great. This was Anwar, the same artist who I showed you earlier, who took a big mobile reflection and a camera where he actually had live feeds of whatever it is that people wanted to show onto the cameras in the souk. This is Sini Korath, who was at the time the Austrian ambassador in Oman, who did a similar project where people could upload things and show them. So it was interactive. I mean, when we talk about media, I'll speak a bit about social media and how things have developed, but really this is an introduction of all forms of media and how it has changed the landscape of art within the city. This is Manal Doyan from Saudi, who also participated in this exhibition, and in a few of the public parks had her photos that were put on these stands. some of the other spaces and installations. This is a piece I will note also from Viduriyami, another way of using these new methods, which was an homage to the cleaners, in which you can only see certain areas of the cleaners' bodies. This is because the cleaners in all countries throughout the GCC work at very particular times, so you don't necessarily see them. So this was just showing the brooms and the glass cases, and thank you to them as part of the exhibition. Musa Omar, another Omani artist, who was showing us prayer rooms with different symbols that symbolize various things to do with, he has a language, another visual language. This is bringing us to some other ways that people started using alternative exhibition methods by an artist named Radhika Kimji, who's an Indian Omani artist who started using public spaces at this time throughout the city. So I'm going to highlight one of these projects, which is called Safe Landings, in which she took over a fort called Barka in 2010. This is an overview shot of the fort, and she placed these cutouts, which were to do with evolving identities. So it was to do with her having studied in the UK, having lived in the States, being from India, also being from Oman, and this morphed modern identity being parachuted into these various environments. So this is an ongoing project which she has, in which she started using different centers around the city to show her cutouts and works. Other projects that were happening at the time is one of the ones that was mentioned in 2010 that I organized, which is Art Speaks, Al-Fan Yatahaddath. And here is Najam Ahdawi from Syria. This is Anwar Sonia. And this was done through one of our first internet call-outs. We contacted the Women's Society, and we contacted different groups to ask anyone who was interested outside of Muscat if they wanted to come and be taught by our Omani artists, and to have a series of workshops, mentorships, programs. And following this, there were a series of exhibitions and things which took place. So after these painting workshops, some of them ended up going on to do various very interesting things, becoming members of galleries. And I remember after this program sitting down with Hassan saying, how can we continue this? And you know, a few years on, people start using social media. People start having thousands of followers. And we wonder where this really fits into the climate of art in Muscat today. So Stal was a space that he opened. And he opened it in 2013 and decided to continue the mission of the circle by scouting through social media people who might not even necessarily have realized they were artists at the time, people who were uploading different videos, interesting things that they saw, and recruiting them, mentoring them, and at the end of it, giving them exhibitions. And they had, which is something really beautiful, ready-made audiences of thousands and thousands of people. So this is one of the things I think would be interesting for us to discuss. Social media, what does it give us? One of the things it definitely gives us for art and culture is a beautiful, captive audience. It gives us a soapbox. So here are a few artists that I just want to highlight from the first round. This is Muzna Musafir. This is a video that eventually went on to go to Dubai for the International Film Festival, in which she talked about the different roles that she played. And as you would imagine, the circle was based on new media, so the new generation of circle artists tend to focus on new media. Reya Rawahi, a sound artist. She in particular talks about ambient noise. She talks about different spaces in which she lives in. The piece which she exhibited was to do with her mother, who at the time was receiving treatment in the hospital. And she recorded the ambient noise within the hospital and made a journal of all of her mother's feelings. So the various sound pieces and journals came together to create this experience of what she felt encompassed her mother's time there. Rawan, who's another really beautiful and wonderful artist who we should all watch. And I'm going to stop it there because there's so many more artists to speak about. But just to end it by saying that this is an ongoing thing. Ways in which dynamism and social media have changed the landscape are something that continues to happen. I'm stopping on this page because anyone who wishes to apply for this year for the Stal Artist Prize, if anyone's watching, please do. Because there's so much which is still continuing to go on and is continuing to grow. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Um, Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be with the great panelists. And I'll start. My name is Ahmad Angawi. I was originally from Mecca, but we live in Jeddah. Mecca, as you know, it's the heart of the Muslim world, and we always think about it as a collective part, seeing the diversity that it have. Seeing the diversity that it have many different cultures within this one culture, and all of us know of the changes that happened. I mean, this is it's clear. But how can you have a constant while you still develop the change as well? I'm sorry, I just have to see this. Do you mind if I sit this way?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. We come from a family of mutawifin. Those of you who doesn't know, mutawif are the servant of the guest of God. My father and grandfather and our ancestors until Abrahamic time, we always believe the people from Mecca, their first craft is to serve the guest. So this is something we take very pride in. And the second craft could be whatever material life will ask you. For example, architect or a doctor or so. My grandfather, he was the head of the policeman in Mecca, and he was very firm and rough at that time. When Hajj comes along, completely flips, and he becomes the servant for the guest of God to come. My father's an architect, and he always worked for the pilgrimage. He established the Hajj Research Center a while ago. It was considered the first think tank in Saudi. And he was the source of my inspiration to what I'm doing right now. And everything we do in Jeddah, it's all serving Mecca. Okay, so what I learned from him, and I think it's a tool of thinking. You have the idea of balance, and balance is always something, and it have two sector of it. For example, if you have the constant and the variable, constant give us traditions, variable give us innovations, tradition give us continuity, innovation give us evolution, continuity give us unity, evolution give us diversity, and within balance you have diversity within unity. And I think, if I may say, this could be the ideology of Mecca that we live by. One of the things I have come across as well as balance, we always think about it as two sector, but there's something called Mizan al-Hikmah, which is the balance of wisdom, and usually it measures many kaffat or many sectors into one. So usually in terms of art or design or an idea, we always balance between environmental, the social, economical, many factors that comes along to give you this kind of equilibrium that you want to reach to. So the most difficult client for an architect is himself. So my father have built his own house, and he spent quite a time building it, and he have based it a lot on the research that was most of the Meccan houses was known for. So he decided to make it on us and the family as the foundation that what I'm going to be talking about right now. And it's we call it, first of all, living museum. So he have worked around maybe 10 years to build the house, and that's because we have worked with craftsmen from different parts of the world, Islamic world. And I remember as a young kid growing up around it and seeing the craftsmen working in there. And now within this house, we have a lot of guests coming in. It becomes, anybody comes as a guest to the country, they always come along to our house, and it becomes like a place to have a dialogue, and it's considered like a think tank in a way. We do discussions, talks. We have even a lot of visitors from the States, and we work with a lot of embassies in Saudi. Also, we had the former President Carter came us twice, and we had a beautiful discussion with we invited a lot of the family of Jeddah to come along and speak and have a discussion with him. And of course, Prince Sultan bin Salman, which is the head of Antiquities and Commission, and now there's this beautiful awareness and interest. We've been trying to do a lot of change from bottom top, and as a family and as a lot of families in Jeddah and Mecca, try to do this, and within even the art world and culture. But there is now this awareness, I think, within society and within the authority as well to preserve. And there's been a lot of great projects, actually, not only within the regions of Hijaz, but if you look at Dar'iyya, if you look at other locations as well, there is a sense of hope, much better than how it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. So even we have a lot of different religious sects, mashayikh, and even a Japanese, he came with his own kimono. He was actually coming and chanting within the house. And we actually tried to make the adhan and chanting, seeing the similarity between us. And I think it was a wonderful experience that we had. So in Hijaz or Mecca and Medina or in Saudi right now, I think we want to be inclusive, not exclusive. And if you look at the Mecca and Medina especially, because all the pilgrimage comes along all the time and bringing their goods, their art, their culture. So it's something we always live by. If you look at our blood, our clothing, our food, there's always a mixture of different regions from all over the world, and this is something we really take pride of. So also part of our tradition is, of course, music, and music is a very important element of communication. So we used to do a lot of the traditional sahba, what we call in Mecca, and we gathered there along. And when I came back from the State, I was in love with jazz, and I had to do something with the music as well. We come with the idea of having jazz and Hijaz together. And each musician, actually the musician who came from Washington, and each of the musicians don't speak the other language. So each one of them were playing for a few minutes, 2 minutes, the other were playing for another 2 minutes, and then you have a nice, beautiful dialogue between them. And of course, with jazz, it's beautiful, even with the mistakes. There is no mistakes in a way. You keep continuing the language, you keep continuing to talk and have this dialogue. And I think for the artists themselves, it was a very interesting experience. We were surprised because we made it 2006, and that was not before all the changes right now that are happening, of course, with the encouragement for entertainment and for culture. But we made it in the news, and it was something really interesting, and we wanted to do it 2 or 3 times, and we have made it with different embassies. We did one also with opera, with the Italian embassy, and we did also a fusion of trip-hop, jazz, and some. It was very interesting experience to see that, and also for our own local musicians to experience that is something we always want to encourage. And even for the musicians themselves, they always get a new experience. I'm not gonna play all this scene, but this is one of the things that we have done there. This is with the German concert. We got a pianist and a drummer, and also within our cultural house, we had the people there sitting and witnessing a live performance of having this kind of dialogue together. Without, of course, rehearsals. That's the whole idea, is to have a live musical dialogue between the two cultures. For us, we believe art, craft, design, culture, and technology all, in a way, kind of work together. Even in the school of teaching that we do, which I'm going to come along later on, it's always nice to bridge those things together. We live in a different time, and of course, segregation. But if you think about it, in the beginning, they all came from the one source. And we want to encourage craftsmanship, not only for thinking as a craft, but also craftsmanship, again, to use your hands, your body, and mind and soul into a piece of work. I'm an artist as well. I do artwork. This is one of the artwork that I did before that concerns also the social aspect. I have a phobia of public speaking. I did this huge big microphone. I used to host open mic in my studio, And whenever we have 20 people, we give them the microphone, then the audience become the speakers themselves. So I was always witnessing within my studio, not interfering as much, just trying to see how I can cope with it. Then I realized if I give a microphone to a group of 20 people within the space, what if I give a microphone to my city? What would my city would say? If I started taking different locations in Jeddah and start collecting most of the voices, I know we have the social media, we have Twitter, and we have Facebook, we have Instagram, of course, but I notice something visual, and there's something with text, but nothing very purely with sound, which is you cannot really differentiate the race, or you know, you can never try to put the stereotype. You just hear him as a human voice. So that was something very close to hear. And I was surprised to hear the different amount of voices that Jeddah had to say. You will sit under this sculpture, it will act like a sponge within whatever it's put in a different area or city, it will collect opinion or voices of that city. Of course, it was a hassle to produce artwork, as you know, in Saudi. If I had to go even to a car shop just to do a fiberglass and try to improvise and work with what I have to develop the piece of work. And this was done at the first, one of the first art week that happened in Saudi, and we together here with Stephen. Now this piece is in a tour as part of Culture Runner and King Abdulaziz World Culture Center that we just came from Detroit, and this work is there right now. So I used to put signs on different areas in Jeddah that says "Atkallam" or talk. I didn't want to define it with the subject. I just wanted for them to express and say whatever they like to say. And it was interesting for me to record what's happening around us. Some people ignore it, some people want to talk. It was just tester to see how the society will react if they had this choice to say something. At the end, I collected a few voices, and I made a website that collected it. And I was very much inspired by Prince Turki Faisal when he had a press conference about the revolution that happens before in Egypt and Tunisia, and they were asking about Saudi. That was years ago when they started. I like what he said. He said, we don't need a revolution, we need an evolution. And in order us to evolve, we need to hear to one another and speak to one another. And especially the case with Saudi, because we believe Mecca as the center core, and we always want to believe it's always going to have to be in balance. So we can't change within essence, and that's something we always seek for. And we can gradually evolve with the new challenges and changes. Also, one of the things as an independent individuals we have done is I'm a co-founder of a group called Hunger, which is an independent artist group, and we came together from different experience and media and background, but we decided to not to work within ourselves only, not to connect with galleries or institutions or so. We wanted to see how artists can come together to produce and make real change within the community. We started scouting for different locations around, so we found one of the best locations is in Aldabbagh. The Aldabbagh still have this kind of beautiful fabric of the buildings, and it's the only thing that left, to be honest, as an old urban settings. Within the balad itself, we chose this house, which is called Ribab Banaja, and used to be a place that accommodate orphanage or widows and pilgrimage who come to Jeddah, and it consists of different rooms. So us as artists, we came along together and we decided together. We put our egos aside for a bit, and we started to help one another how to hang each other's work. What could be better to put it in this side or that side. We even paid from our own pocket just to get a space, an exhibition, and to start it. And that was the space, and an old left house. It wasn't used for anything. And we made it like a small entity that we keep doing workshops. And what's most important for us at that time is we connect art to the different level of classes in the society. So we had the community around the area comes and goes inside the space. We had able to have a dialogue with them. We had very high-class people coming in as well. So it's a very interesting, beautiful mixture of people, and this is what exactly we wanted to reach, and not only to have a one-sided viewer. So what the most beautiful experiences, of course, us as artists coming in and sitting down and sharing our ideas and build them. But of course, trying to manage artists, if you're an artist, that's a big mess. We try to do it whenever we agree on something. We did it twice, and we're hoping to do it the third time soon, hopefully if we agree on a lot of points. And we're always interested in a new experience. And Marwa Mariët, she's here. She joined us in the second exhibition as well. And I hope I have some photos here. So this is some of the photos that with the community that we have done the workshop. So what I did is I did this work here. It's called Al-Qumra, which is a camera obscura. If you put a lens and a transparent paper, it will flip the image from outside in, similar to how our eyes work. And the whole idea of the work is to differentiate between sight and insight. There's a lot of restoration work happening in Balad, but there's only focus on the buildings, but they're not the human aspect. So we always say with sight you have few meters, then it stopped. With insight you have many generations until it fills in. So this work was questioning this idea, and I was placing in different locations of the houses. And then the kids, I saw them coming along and interested. So those kids collect those boxes for living and give it to a place. So we wanted to make it a place that they can enjoy and play. So each one of them, they had to do their own box and start walking around the balad and seeing it differently than the normally that they see. And this is something we were very happy that we made an impact within the place that we have the exhibit, and we have had a dialogue with them. The second exhibition from Al-Hangar was also in another place that it haven't been used yet. It's all concrete, and we have talked to the owners. First, they have rejected, and they thought we were crazy. But then in the beginning, little by little, they have accepted. We have talked to the family and convinced them that we're just going to use the space for exhibit art. And the space was much bigger this time in a prime location within Jeddah, but it still haven't any changes within it. And this is the exhibition that Marwa and Mariët came along, and a lot of other artists as well. And we're gonna agree, and we're gonna do this third exhibition, inshallah. But that was interesting because also it had this idea of rooms, and within those rooms, each artist again had to exhibit something. For me, I exhibited something related to an archaeology project that happened within close to the Mosque of Mecca, which is the house of Sittana Khadija. Of course, with the expansion, they had to work at that time. But what my father did is to document as much as he can of the house. So he had 100 pages of this research was there, and I always see it all the time. I remember when I was very young, maybe around 9 years old. This picture here. He brought us with him to help dig and help work within a very limited time. But I remember when I digged in that location, I saw the pattern in the mihrab. And within this pattern, when I went after, I think around 15 years, I went to the Prince's School to do my geometry studies and all. And I realized this pattern have a beautiful analysis. So I went in there, did the analysis of that pattern, develop a whole space that when you walk into the space, you would just experience in a dark room, you would hold the flashlight and you would see each research work as is. So it will give you the idea if this something is still there and hidden. The other thing I will be talking about is the school that we have in the house and in the old district. And this is a collaboration between the Princeton School of Traditional Arts and Art Jamil in Jeddah. I run the school as a program director. We just started a year and a few months ago. And what's great about it is it's within the old district of Balad. And this is the first time you have an institution very focused in traditional arts. And with the objective of the course, of course, to get to develop traditional artists, independent, or to let them work within offices within the Balad. And the third thing, they can also become trainers, so they can teach back again to the community as well. So we teach them 6 modules: geometry, nabati, basic woodwork, gypsum, ornaments, and then method and material, ceramics, and then design and make their final project. So they will learn the foundation as is, and then they tend to innovate after they learn the steps. And what's great about this, we have different people from different backgrounds. We have 3 ladies above 16, we have 4 above 20, and we have this beautiful mixture of age within the class itself. And they're all producing beautiful artwork that is inspired by the houses around them. And since we bring the young generation within the old district of Balad, as if you're pumping blood within the body. So the whole city of Old Balad is becoming alive a bit, more and more. And for them who haven't had any experience of art, they were surprised to see what result they can get. And I think this is what some of the beautiful geometry work you can come along, that if you lose logic and sense, you can apply it in art, you can apply it in design. We also open our doors for the community, also for the kids around. Sometimes in the weekend, we do analysis of a lot of the geometry within the houses and trying to, again, understand this beautiful language that has always been forgotten. And of course, using the traditional means of course, how to do the pigment, how you grind it. So you'll be more careful and aware what you're gonna paint if that's the process of taking to make a paint by itself. And we just had it 3 months ago, we had our graduation. And now we're accepting 16 students. And we're looking, hopefully, this is only a 1-year program, and this is our exhibition, the work they have done for the students. And we had great success, alhamdulillah, there. A lot of people were interested. And we're hoping to do more and connect more with the community. And this is some of the communities around this center. Those come along and we always work with them. We always bring families as well in the weekend. And yet again, we have the serious 1-year program. Sorry for making it long, and thank you for everything.
Right?
Yeah, just take time to. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Wow, so after this wonderful in-depth view of Jeddah, Mecca, Medina, and Muscat, I'm going to take you on, zoom out a little bit more to a macro level and look at the UAE and the emergence of contemporary art in the UAE. As Mariët mentioned, I am a long-term resident of the Gulf, born and raised in Kuwait, have been living in the UAE for the past 25 years. And I must say, what happened when the announcements of the museums that have yet to open, however, the impact of that announcement in terms of the cultural and art scene has been profound, and it is always insightful to look back at history and remember some of the time frames that Mariët mentioned, even though we are in a much more dynamic time period. So with that, I'm going to take you through a little journey, one that I lived through the past 10 or 15 years, starting with looking at the contemporary art scene in the UAE through its 3 major cities. And again, from a macro view, how these developed, what the character of each city was, and how the arts reflected that. And it's always good to remember that 50 years ago, this is what Abu Dhabi looked like. That's the downtown streets. This was the waterfront and the, oops, I guess mine is going faster.
Yeah.
What happened?
Speeding you up, Hanan.
All right, okay, that's a hint. Anyway, this is how you would get into Abu Dhabi. There were no bridges. You waited till the tide receded, and you would cross the Sabqa before the causeway was built of Maqta. This is Maqta Bridge in the 70s, taking shape. Okay, so then looking at the cities from a contemporary art perspective. And as we know, the UAE is a federation of 7 emirates that came together in 1971 through a very complex and difficult process. Each of the emirates has its own sort of character and identity that is evolved. Sharjah was one of the first cities. When I moved to the UAE in the early 1990s, I asked, so where are the museums? Where do we go to see any kind of art or cultural heritage? And everybody said Sharjah. It was kind of known as the cultural capital of the UAE at the time. And so appropriate to start with that. As Aisha mentioned, the Fine Arts Society was founded in Sharjah. It's still based in Sharjah in the 80s. And Ibtisam, an artist, and Nujum, who is not here but is part of our symposium, are all active members and founders of that. So we can learn more about it from them. So Sharjah has 17 or so museums of various kinds, contemporary art, science, archaeology, calligraphy, very diverse. It does have a historic center, unlike Abu Dhabi, which doesn't have that as much. It has one sort of cultural foundation. But Sharjah has a historic center that is being revived and very much integrated into the contemporary art. This is the heart of what they call the Heart of Sharjah. And from a contemporary perspective, the scene in Sharjah changed very much in about 2003. And traditionally or historically, Sharjah is called the cultural capital because of its ruler, Sheikh Sultan Al-Qasimi, who is a poet, holds 2 PhDs, a playwright in his own right, and has really guided the development of the emirate, very much balancing tradition and development, hand in hand. But in 2003, his daughter returned, Sheikh Ahur, from studying in the UK, and the Biennale, the Contemporary Art Biennale at the time, was happening, but in a very different way. And so when she got involved, basically she took what she had learned and seen in Documenta and other places in Europe and revived the Biennale by giving it a different, inviting curators, bringing on an artistic director, including different media, similar to what Aisha talked about with, the artist Hassan Mir coming back and bringing in different kinds of artistic medium. And so I just will go through a few images of sort of the contemporary arts in Sharjah. This is, as I said, in Bank Street. The other thing that they did at the Biennale was very much integrate the contemporary art scene into the historic buildings. Again, something that you've talked about, Ahmad, in Al-Balad. And here is the artist Susan Hafuna with one of her pieces at Beit al-Sirkal. The Sharjah Art Foundation also has really championed and spearheaded organizing exhibitions and scholarship about lesser-known art histories and especially the modern art of the Arab world. So this is one of the Sudanese exhibitions of Sudanese modern art that was really very well received. This is one of the Biennale photos. Again, the other important aspect of what Sharjah does is their commissioning of artworks and the generous support of artists from the region to be able to commission an experiment that really wasn't available before. And so in a way, they have allowed the artists of the region a way to experiment, show their work, which has then really become international through the Biennale and through all the visiting curators and directors and artists. Sorry, that was by a Lebanese artist. Anyway, many of those photos are in the paper that Mariët mentioned, so it's got reference to who the various artists are if I don't mention them. Again, artwork at the Biennale. The Biennale has now become very prestigious. It's critically acclaimed. Curators are very honored to participate in it, and this is in a little over than a decade that this has happened. Again, more of the interventions. The March meeting is also an important aspect of the Biennale that brings together, again, artists, curators, scholars, art historians from the region to debate, talk about issues, and that's an annual event. It's not a biannual. Okay, so a few 100 or so kilometers from Sharjah, we're in Dubai. Everybody knows Dubai, of course, and Dubai has been a trading post, a commercial, financial entrepot. It's connected east and west for centuries. And when the contemporary art, when it started developing in Dubai, was really done mostly through private initiatives. Unlike what we saw in Sharjah, which was very much a vision of the leadership and the ruling family, Dubai were entrepreneurs, businessmen. It started with private galleries. That's what we had mostly in Dubai in the 90s. There was the Dubai Museum and a small, more of on the heritage side. But in terms of contemporary art, the first galleries in the UAE were in Dubai. And what really marked the coming of the contemporary art scene as we know it now in Dubai was the Christie's auction. First auction was in 2006. And it was an auction of contemporary, modern, and Arab art held in the Arab world, the first one. Speaking to the auctioneers at the time, they were, very nervous. Had never been an auction. They didn't know what the art market was, who was buying, who was collecting, and they just held their first auction, and it was a huge success. And I think that signaled Dubai as the marketplace. And it really took the infrastructure that the city already had in terms of, travel and airports and logistics and hotels and all of that, and just layered the contemporary art on it. And all of a sudden, you had people coming from everywhere. I mean, obviously, also, this is 2007. This coincided with a period of a big economic boom. Post 9/11, many people found it less attractive for various reasons to either live in the U.S., study in the U.S., or invest in the U.S. So all of a sudden there was a lot of money and capital from the region that looked for a home in the region, and there was a booming real estate market. There was a young population returning back to live. There was affluence. And as Mariët had mentioned from that conference in 2010, one of the things that Philly Montebello said, even what happened in New York, is where wealth goes, art follows. So collections have moved from the south to the north, and now we see them moving east, and that's very much what happened in Dubai in the early post 9/11, that fueled and helped affirm it as a contemporary art marketplace for the region. And these are just some views from those auctions that really became, a social event as well. And then one of the most important events in Dubai that I think many of you may be familiar with is Art Dubai. I think that solidified Dubai's position, both as a marketplace, but also as a platform for exhibitions, for programming, and for connecting people from East and West to have all various types of dialogues. And Art Dubai was started in 2007, and so it's well into just celebrated its 10th year. And here are some views. You could see, students, again, in a country where we don't yet have contemporary art museums or some museums, the art fairs and really serve as a platform for education as well, both educating the youth, and educating professionals in the ways of exhibiting and curating and writing and thinking about the arts. The other aspect of Art Dubai that is also pretty relevant is the modern section, and they've introduced a modern of Arab and South Asian art. That's been very important. And the Global Art Forum, again, a platform for debate and discussion that's really like no other, I would say. It's very much focuses on themes and looking at our place in the world, our place as individuals, our place as artists, our place as a city as well. And I think that's one of the most exciting thing about the arts and culture development in the UAE is that it has created a place for people to have conversations that you're not likely to see in print, in a paper, or at a conference. And that's something to really cherish and nurture, and it's heartening to see that even at the government level that's being supported. Sultan Al-Qasimi, of course, very well-known commentator, collector, and patron of the arts. And then last but not least in Dubai, we have the Al Sirkal hub. And if you haven't been there and you travel to the region, you really must go. It has become the hub of creativity in Dubai. It's very much a grassroots initiative funded by the Al Serkal family, started in an industrial area with a few warehouses and a few galleries, and has grown to be a vibrant community center. This is at the opening of their latest expansion of the building called Concrete, designed by Rem Koolhaas, who you see on the left. This is his first building, despite his many initiatives at designing, thinking, studying, researching Dubai and the UAE. This is the first project that got realized in the region, or in UAE. Again, a very mixed, diverse, vibrant, active scene. And then Abu Dhabi, coming back to the capital of the UAE, and looking at how the arts developed there in a very different manner. This is the cultural foundation in Abu Dhabi, and it is the only historic building that's remaining on the left, Qasr al-Husn, which is undergoing a renovation now and will be hopefully open soon. For Abu Dhabi, it was, again, when the new leadership took helm in 2005 after the late Sheikh Zayed passed away. One of the things they set out to do was to look at the vision for Abu Dhabi, and which is known as the Vision 2030. And in that vision, arts and culture were firmly planted, and Abu Dhabi wants to be a knowledge-based society. They want to diversify their economy, and you are 10 years later, you very much see that now in the initiatives that Mariët raised of NYU Abu Dhabi and a host of others. So where was the arts and culture going to be? So the Satiate Culture District, which many of you may have heard about, was earmarked for Satiate Island. This island you see in red, that is off the coast of Abu Dhabi. It's a natural island. There are many man-made islands in Dubai, but Abu Dhabi can claim a lot of natural islands. And it's about 27 square kilometers, and the concept was to develop the cultural district there. This is January 2007 with the announcement of the cultural district and the Pritzker Prize-winning architects who were invited to design the various components of it. I say, as somebody who lived in Abu Dhabi before and after, this was definitely a turning point. We went to bed on January 29th, 2007 as one city, and we woke up and we heard this announcement, and we really couldn't believe that this was all coming to our town. This really took our breath away. 10 years later, many people say, well, where are these museums? We haven't seen them yet. What's the delay? Again, I'm heartened by
38 years.
38 years, exactly. And the Guggenheim, I work with the Guggenheim Foundation. I mentioned that earlier. And the Guggenheim in New York was, 16 years in the making. And the architect who designed it, Frank Lloyd Wright, did not live to see the opening of it. So these are generational projects. But from that moment, what we all realized is that the leadership at the top had made a commitment to arts and culture in a very big way. And that, even what it did in those 10 years is really, it focused that commitment, and it allowed all these various other initiatives to happen. And for the young people to study arts and to say, I can have a career in that. That is something that's viable. Before that, even in Arabic, you say, I want to be a fannani or a fannan. That sounds like you're going to be a belly dancer. That's the only kind of fannan that people knew, or a singer. Now that's very different. And there are really young people that are pursuing these careers with a lot of passion and finding their voice through the arts. Anyway, these are the architects. Here is the master plan of the Satiate Cultural District, Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, Louvre Abu Dhabi, Zayed National Museum, and the Performing Arts Center. This is a view of the Guggenheim, which I can answer questions about later. The Louvre Abu Dhabi, which is and the Zayed National Museum by Foster's. This is a picture of a photograph of the Louvre Abu Dhabi. It's not a rendering. And that is the museum that is closest to reality. It will be scheduled to be open later this year. We're all very, very excited about that. The Louvre Abu Dhabi is a universal museum that will look at the universal dialogue and creation from sort of the birth of humanity through to the modern and contemporary. And it is a intergovernmental agreement between the government of France and the government of the UAE, and it involves 17 different French museums under the umbrella of Agence France Musée. So the collection of the Louvre Abu Dhabi will be an Abu Dhabi government collection, but also there will be loans from the 13 different French museums. And what you see here is the first exhibition that the Louvre did called The Birth of a Museum, where they debuted some of the collections of the Louvre Abu Dhabi. There is the French Minister of Culture on the left, and Zani Sheikh Hazza on the right, viewing it. These are some of the pieces that you hopefully will see when you visit next year. A real engagement, and I must say that now people speak of the Louvre Abu Dhabi and they have to actually say which Louvre. Like, is it the Louvre Abu Dhabi? Is it the Louvre Paris? Like, no one would have imagined that would happen. This is at the temporary exhibition space in Manara when the collection was, parts of the collection were debuted. Okay, and then moving to the more contemporary, which is the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, as our museum is still under development, but we have been working on building the collection. And again, as Mariët said, starting a museum from scratch is a fairly daunting task, not least of which is building the collection and the narrative. And so the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi will look at art from the 1960s forward in all different media and across geographies and across time. And this is one of the exhibitions that we had in 2014. This is the exhibition space at Manara, and you see it's really very active and diverse. This is one of the artists, Ghada Amir, Samia Halabi, from the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi collection, and the Yaya Kusama as well from the collection. A lot of engagement with youth. It's a young country. It's very, both from those who live in the UAE and the Emiratis as well. So there's a lot of programs that revolve around that. The other thing that the Guggenheim focuses on and is really has been enriching for the community is engagement with living artists. So in all of our work, all of our exhibitions, there's artists that are participating and really getting to know members of the community, like Hassan Khan here, Feng Mengbo from Beijing, the late James Rosenquist, who passed away earlier this year, but we was very, very fortunate to have him visit and spend time and meet the young artists in the university. And our late Hassan Sharif, who Maya spoke about yesterday. And here's the latest exhibition with an artwork by Anish Kapoor. And the attendance at the various events is really stellar in that way. So there's a real hunger for the arts. Moving on to a newer institution that Mariët mentioned again is the New York University Abu Dhabi Library, and the chief curator and founder on the left, Maya, who's with us, with one of our art patrons. Again, at the gallery has really engaged in a dialogue with the community in a very, very interesting way. They are able to do exhibitions that are digging deeper into what is happening in the region locally, but also bringing in international artists, having them do residencies, work in the community. And again, that's always very enriching when we have artists. That's one thing, is having more artists live and work in the UAE is something that we hope to see in the coming years. So having a gallery like NYU Abu Dhabi provide those opportunities has really been very helpful. And this is the latest exhibition title. But we cannot see them. Right. And Maya can share more about that if you have any questions. and another exhibition on technology. And then one of the latest or newest organizations is the Salama bint Hamdan Foundation, based in Abu Dhabi, and they are the commissioners of the UAE Pavilion, National Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. And that's another moment that was really important for propelling and bringing focus and attention to the contemporary arts, is when the UAE, the first Gulf country to have a permanent pavilion at the Venice Biennale, which means that they participate every other year in art and then in architecture. And that's really been very, very inspiring and productive, and for the younger artists to kind of see where it is that they could aspire to be at someday. This is a view from the UAE Pavilion this year, curated by Ahmad Nassar. Another view. And last but not least is Warehouse 421, which is a new space opened in Abu Dhabi, in the MENA, the old port area, by the Salama bint Hamdan Foundation, that is a sort of a programming space where it's in between. It's not the museum and it's not the university gallery, but it's a space where various independent curators can work and program across, not just contemporary art. They've got exhibitions that are more about culture and heritage and those in contemporary art. This one is curated by a young emerging Emirati curator, Munir Al-Sayegh. It includes a work by Manal Dwayan, who again Aisha mentioned, a Saudi artist based in London, and another view from emerging Emirati artists. And with that, I will leave you and hope you have a little bit of a flavor of what's happening in the UAE in the contemporary arts. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Noor Aldabbagh. I'm here from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. I'm very passionate about promoting the arts and supporting artists and enabling the creative movements that are happening back home. I moved to Saudi about a year ago. I was in Dubai before that. So I was lucky to experience a lot of the exciting events that Hanan talked about. I could talk forever about art. I get really excited about it, but in this case, I feel it would be better to show you. So I have a previous life as a filmmaker, and in the most recent exhibition I curated in Jeddah, I did a sort of behind-the-scenes film. That is to say, I produced it. It was directed by Abdurrahman Abdullah, who's probably on the live feed right now. So if we could dim the lights, that would be amazing. It's a 5-minute film. I just want to, who's been to Saudi Arabia before here? Oh, not bad. Okay, well then I want to take you back. This time to the exhibition that happened in March during sort of yearly event, which is sort of our art week, I guess, in Saudi Arabia. It's on its 3rd year now. It's thanks to the Jeddah Art Council and part of the 2139 not-for-profit arts initiative in Saudi, that many exhibitions happen at the same time. This was one, and enjoy the 5-minute film. After that, we can hopefully have more of an interactive sort of discussion. When my co-curator, Qaswara, first told me that he wanted to work with this space, I thought he was a bit crazy because we had agreed to do something much smaller in his gallery.
المساحة هذه كانت يعني مبنى فاضي، استلمناه مساحة فارغة وجهزنا الأرضية والكهرباء، إضاءة، تكييف.
We issued an open call for Saudi artists across all contemporary mediums, sculpture, painting, photography, installation, to submit their personal interpretation of flow, or tadaffuk in Arabic, to create a narrative that reflects a little bit of how life in this part of the world is today.
خالد زاهد
This is the bicycle that he's working on.
No, I really wanted a vintage bicycle, عرفتي كيف? I think. And it suits the whole theme as the vintage theme.
He's making a statement about where we're going or not going.
زي ما قلت نقل فين حنروح من حكاية البترول، فين السعودية حتروح، واتس الباث حقها، أو هي مصير مجهول.
هذا العمل I'm not sure أنا ما قاعد أفكر وأقول I want to build this thing. It's something that happens through building different sculptures, different shapes, and experimenting with videos and learning coding and interaction mechanics. بعدين في طلع معايا this hand with a mobile that is filming live video invading your privacy. So usually الناس بيصوروا الأعمال بيشوفوا العمل الفنان they want to get him naked بس يفهموا وش قاعد يفكر وش قاعد يقول. هنا حسيت إن بسوي فيهم هم نفس الشيء. It is an experimental piece. It's not a piece that is خلاص أنا عارف إنه هو هذا and that's it. It's something that I want to see كيف حيصير وتعامل الناس معه. تقريبا اللي صار.
Traditional Islamic art أغلبه كان يخدم a purpose, whether it being architecture or things that you use every day or.
The 6 pointed star, it was a very common symbol in Islamic art and architecture.
And labyrinth as a form of art is known to be a form of meditation. فمثلا كيف برضو نرجع لعلاقة الإنسان مع نفسه وعلاقة الإنسان مع ربه، فبحاول إنه أعكس هذه العلاقة من خلال الإكسبيرينس اللي كل أحد حيشوف العمل وحيتفاعل معاه. إيش الإكسبيرينس اللي هي ممكن تعطيهم هي.
I'm speaking from the second floor, where, as you can see in the background and surrounding me from every corner, are inspiring people, artists, social workers, doctors from every sort of background that you can imagine. My performance is about once a week, and it is weaving of 15 stories. Those stories are written directly by people from Jeddah about their lives, about their intimate moments in time, about their history, their experiences.
We started this collaboration for a contemporary art exhibition and moved it to this amazing space because we realized we were doing something bigger than what we originally planned for.
وتم الحمد لله بالتعاون مع فن جميل، قهوة مد، بنفسجيل، The Humming Tree with the Other Story project.
People were joining in and it became more than just something restricted to a small circle of people who are educated in art or, you know, the elite of society who are able to afford such a thing. And I think that's one of the biggest achievements of the Flow or Tadaffuq exhibition in 2017 in Jeddah.
Hope you enjoyed that. So maybe I'll give a couple of minutes of context.
Maybe we'll leave a few minutes so people can ask questions.
Absolutely. I started Benefsajil, which comes from the Arabic phrase Benefsjil, or in the spirit of a generation, in order to allow for sort of collaborative projects and learning in order to develop art. This is an example of what we've worked on in the past. And the scope of our work is the Gulf. So the latest was in Jeddah, and this film focuses on Jeddah specifically. The 3 artists who were featured are all Jeddah locals, but there were actually 38 artists in the exhibition, including Mariët, who is here today. And really, I mean, the art world is not so big. It's almost exploding now, but it is very much, interlinked, and you see the same people, and there is that sense of community. So, for example, Al-Hangar, second exhibition that Ahmad mentioned, was in this space as well. Before we did it, they started, and it was a more raw kind of thing. We built on what they did. Incidentally, I think their exhibition was called Mab'outh al-Matar, and ours was called Tadaffuq. So for non-Arabic speakers, it was almost like a foretelling of how the space would evolve. Their exhibition was, I don't know how you would translate it, sort of like the calling towards the rain, or the rain messenger, and ours was flow. And all the artists were interpreting flow in different ways. So the examples here, you have Iyad Maghazil. He's interested in the flow of information through social media and wanting to turn the tables on people interrogating his art. And, he said artists come in, look at your work, and it's like they want to get you naked. And maybe that was wishful thinking on his part, but he really managed to take that data, all the footage, documenting people who came through the space, look at the numbers. He started an Instagram account where he would put those little videos of people from the art world who are coming in and looking. So interesting things are happening. Those projects are evolving. Artists are building on them. And it's very exciting. I think I'll just wrap it up at that, and can answer any questions anybody has as we continue our discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, panelists. This is really an incredibly rich set of accounts we've heard from Oman, from Jeddah, from Riyadh, Medina, and the UAE. I really am very grateful for these case studies, because they give a richness to what could seem a sort of abstract notion of dynamism. You saw the dynamism in action, which is so important. And we got a good sense of the history of it, I think, in these different locales. So thank you so much. We had, in our fantasy, come up with all these questions that we could discuss, but we really want to give all of you a chance. We have about 15 minutes, so we want to give a chance for some interaction with these outstanding panelists. I certainly have lots of questions if you don't have any, but I think I want to give all of you a chance. So here are the rules of play. We've seen a lot of playful art, and it's good to have rules of the game, so we know. Please raise your hand, we'll call on you. I will keep an eye out for people who have hands up for a long time and so forth, so you don't have to hold them all the time. When you're called on, please say who you are and what your affiliation is, and if you can, stick to one question or comment. If there's more, we'll try to fit those in. By all means, please. Yes, sir. Oh, yes, and there are mics that will come to you.
I'm Dave Ottaway from the Woodrow Wilson Center, former Washington Post correspondent in the Middle East. Ahmad, I've been to your father's house with great pleasure, and we had one of those, sessions of exchange of ideas. My question is both to you and Noor. What pushback are you feeling from the religious establishment, not known for its tolerance, for this explosion of arts in Saudi Arabia?
Thank you for your questions. I think for whatever activity we're doing, and especially in our house, in our Makkiyah, we always try to, again, have this concept of balance, right? So there's a lot of innovation that we do, but all this innovation that we do is sits within tradition. So in a way, we're not really inventing something new, we're just reviving something that was old. So, and that gives us a very strong leverage to whoever thinks different or wise. In our house, on our culture house, we always allow for all people with all different way of thinking. Sometimes in that space that you saw that we did jazz, we put a partition to have ladies and men and sit in the same space. Sometimes they're all men, sometimes they're all ladies. What we like to do is to have a space that accommodates every way of thinking. at least a place that you can sit down and have a discussion and a dialogue. And so far, to be honest, we haven't been facing any challenges, but in a way, I know that there's a lot of good changes happening, and I think people have realized a lot of the situations or problems that happen. And as artists, I think we're done by pointing the problem, and we really want to become part of a solution. And and that feeling, I think, sits especially within Jeddah. Of course, in the kingdom, there's different parts, and each part have a different way of dealing with it. But I think in Jeddah, it have this kind of respect, and since King Abdullah, Allah yarhamu, he started the dialogue at his time, and I think he put the steps and the foundation for what's happening right now. And to allow this kind of dialogue happening, I think made the people aware that you can communicate, you can discuss, and to show there is, in each area, there is a minority and a majority of specific way of thinking. And I can say right now it's very promising because we were trying to do this kind of change again from down up, but we really feel that there is something from top going down and pulling us, unless this is the direction we can meet at half point. And that's very, very rewarding and promising to see.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, everybody has a funny hay'a story to tell about the time they lived in Saudi Arabia. We actually never had any sort of confrontations or encounters with somebody who was actively looking to prevent us from work. On the contrary, we've had curiosity and interest, and we've had conversations. Because, for example, this exhibition was in a public space where anybody could come in for free and look around, and outside is an area where a lot of people walk, so they might end up coming through, and we made sure our volunteers were trained to interact with people of all different types. We have to be tolerant too. What makes Benefsijil different is that we engage with creatives or creatives can engage on a voluntary basis. So rather than having like a long-term contract like a gallery with an artist where the artist needs to do certain work for the gallery and they can't work with others or whatever, is creatives can come in and go out and on their own terms, or work on developing a project or a design, because we work with designers too, and then afterwards take it to market or whatever. So we have that flexibility, and some of the most brilliant people that have been on the team for different parts, and especially in the research part, because we do a lot of research in order to shape our programming and figure out what we want to do, have been very conservative people. So, there was a guy who wouldn't shake hands ever, but I loved him and he loved me. And I don't know, things are changing. Like Ahmed said, the one challenge that I would say we have faced is that people are still scared to be themselves in public space. We're not used to it yet. And I mentioned the research, and last year's sort of research focused on what do artists in Saudi Arabia want. So we use this process of human-centered design where we do studio visits, we do interviews, and we try to understand how we can build on what they're doing. What we learned was that there are ample opportunities to exhibit and sell work, but artists were very keen to engage in public spaces, to have a kind of larger impact on society, or even just the ability to play, but not within a white cube. So that's what we're working on now, and we're facing the challenge of people understanding why we're doing it. So I think, Oman was ahead of the game maybe, and we have artists who have done it on an individual basis, but on a sort of organizational basis, I hope that can be the next thing that we do.
Excellent question. I see, please go ahead, Dima, and then I see you in the back as well.
Hi, I'm Dima Faham from the UAE Embassy. I'm very interested to know how much collaboration there is within the Gulf countries in terms of the art scene. I'm more familiar with the UAE, obviously. I'm very excited to learn so much about Saudi. I didn't know that, or Oman. How much do you work together, if at all? And how do you perceive each other's art development and evolution?
Who would like to? Ahmad or Ma'am? Let's hear from Aisha.
Yeah, well, one of the things which I mentioned earlier was how important I think community building is. And when I first showed Anwar Sonia, I mentioned equivalence. Well, if we go forward a bit to Hassan Mir, equivalence on this table would be Hassan Sharif and would be, let's say, Ahmed Matar. Now, why do I mention these names? Because these are names of people who had spaces, physical spaces, where artists could come, in cities in each of these countries, where they could mix, where they could meet like-minded peers, where they could discuss their ideas and do things. And these people all later became responsible for institutions, for having actual galleries or, eventually having roles in museums. One of the things which I think is important to know is all these people knew each other, These people would travel, these people would see each other, these people have exhibited together. So even though we think of it as individual collectives or individual communities, the awareness of each other's practices are important because these sort of beautiful fireworks or sparks that are taking place in each country, it makes you feel a little less alone. Perhaps earlier, before we had these explosions and these interesting things, that we were all doing these things together at a similar time, Yeah.
I think I can speak maybe for what I've been experiencing between Saudi and Dubai, and there's quite a few. Even I think for the New Art Dubai, there's a collaboration between the King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture and Art Dubai, and this is something exciting for us. And also I think in Dubai Design Days also was something as a collaboration as well there. I was very fortunate to be involved in there. And I think the Art Jamil community are doing a lot, whether in Jeddah and now just collaborating with the Prince's School from London to do something, a school there, and also having the center in Dubai as well there for a hub. And in terms of culture, I think from Saudi, there's a lot happening within the region, but I was also surprised to see there's this kind of exchange between craftsmanship program that they start doing. And there's one that happened between Saudi Arabia and Korea in terms of pottery making and craftsmanship. And to be honest, this was something like a 1-month exchange program where you get the masters from Saudi and Korea to develop. And I think, again, there's all this initiative, of course, Al-Mansouriya doing a great residency program, I think, in Paris. And so there is a lot of, from Saudi, I think, whether it was a family initiative or independent or even governmental one, I think, they're seeking to go and do more collaboration with the region around.
I have a gentleman in the back and lady in front of him. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Darren, and I'm visiting the area, traveling around the country. My question is for Ahmed and Aisha. I'm interested in the history of the early caliphates and how there was an explosion of art and science. And I'm really interested to see how contemporary Western art is finding its way into these areas. And I'm curious about the interplay and the education on the history of the science and art and how that's playing out.
Well, it's an interesting point you mentioned, and I think during that time, I was myself, growing up in high school, reading those books, the Golden Age, and the time that there's a lot of innovations and discoveries that happen, and I was very excited to see this character, this scholar, that he's an artisan, he's a scholar, he's a religious figure, he's even a calligrapher at some point, and that kind of multidisciplinary character. That how did he get all this knowledge, and how did he actually apply it in his daily life? So it was interesting to see where is that mixture, where that separation came along. But I think during that time, even he was also very much inclusive, and he was also receptive of science and technology and art from around the world. I think that led him to become to where he reached to in that golden age. And I think we live in a time that we have to have a discussion and all this cultures. I can say it from the word of the Quran. خلقناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. Meaning that we have created from tribes and nations to get to know one another, made the best of you to be at, right? So to get to know one another, not to convince one another or not to be better than one another, But that knowing, I think that make us move forward and move ahead. And of course, with art, and as you know, there is fine art, there's now craftsmanship. I know this important categorization to give it its more direction to to be able to perfect wherever you are in that category. But they're all linked, and I do believe they're all linked. Even as an artist, when he creates an artwork, he definitely bring a lot of points in together. For me personally, I mean, I appreciate the Western art or contemporary art, and I think art is also universal, can speak to the human aspect. It's all like linking circles to one another. So you can speak from the Arab point of view, you can speak from the human point of view, you can speak from the religious point of view, but they all serve into one, I think, humanity point of view that we all share. And I think there is a way, as the character of the artist, and it's always interesting to examine it when I teach, and why traditional arts, for example, what is it against, or is it something that we want to go back and live in the past? I think it's very interesting to look at it in a different way, that the idea of a living tradition, that it doesn't have to be stuck as how we were only, but we always have to think those craftsmen and those people have used the best technology, best material to create the best object at that time. And we live in a time right now, there's a lot of accessibility around us, but how can we do that again with the idea of not losing within our own essence, our fitra? So again, I think in a way you always try to reconnect within your own self, reconnect within your own human. And of course, beauty is very universal, so you can see and appreciate beauty no matter what country it comes from or whatever it brings it in. But I think there's principles that can be shared. And for me personally, from the point of view of maybe a traditional artist, or I think it doesn't makes me more close, rather it opens the doors for me more to connect with a piece of work of art with mind and body and soul. Yeah.
Aisha, you want to add something to that?
Yes, I wanted to add, there's a few very notable academics in this field for modern and contemporary Arab arts, but there aren't very many, and it's because the history is still being written in many ways. So when you don't have an art history course, or when you're still formulating art programs and art education, what are the influences, right? So what is it that people are reading? What is the art history that they're reading that makes them develop into the artists they are today? I mentioned in the circle statement, it's from a quote from Ibn Arabi, right? I mean, these are the different things that you grow up around that formulate your points of view. And they're mixed with Western art, right? They're mixed with the Impressionists, and they're mixed with the readings that all of us have of history of art. But they come out to become something slightly different. And in the exhibition that we've mentioned a few times that Maya curated, but we cannot see them, there's a room which has this really beautiful eclectic library of things that people were reading in this group between 1980 to 2008. And it had things as diverse as Charlie Chaplin to Feyruz to Marxist. I mean, it was just spectacular. It was this really wonderful mixture of things that create, these different consciousness that we all have as individuals. So in terms of references that we're continuing to absorb, I think we'll still see what it becomes.
We have time for one last question. I'm really sorry. But I think maybe some of the panelists are able to stay a little bit longer if you want to discuss with them, but please.
Yes. It was not meant as a follow-up to the question that was asked before, but it turns out to be in this attempt to revive traditional art, essentially. Do you see a growing interest on the part of the public, perhaps to go back and reincorporate some of that? I think you were showing, for example, the plaster work, which is clearly an architectural thing. Is there a growing interest in reincorporating some of these traditional techniques and crafts in new buildings, for example?
Yes.
And also in restoring what I think anybody has been to Jeddah feels, the heart of breaking decay that we see.
I would also like Hanan to speak to this. So, but let's have both perspectives from. You start.
Yes, for sure. If you've been to Al Jeddah, you would see what's happening there. And I think what we're hoping doing differently is we're really focusing in that human elements within the old city, and how is this human element that may be embodied within a craftsman that sadly also is gone. If you look at around there, you don't find. If you look at Fes, for example, it's full of craftsmen. And the city is not only depending on the tourism, now they're producing, whether the tourism are here or not. It's a living city. The always question of dilemma is to continue the line of tradition, and maybe you can see it in calligraphy. It's very evident that you do the way the calligraphy is done, with the point, with the proportions, exactly the way they are. And I think this is very important. It's like the branch of the tree, of the trunk of the tree itself. And then you have the other line, which is you can innovate and you can play with shapes and develop more, and that's also important. But you don't have to cut either or. And I think to have this continuation of line, for everyone want to learn, he can go back again to the masters. So we've been scouting in Saudi with the Commission of Antiquities to look for those craftsmen. Where are they? And to document and analyze, and then innovate. We're teaching our students to do this beautiful geometry and to learn how to analyze, and some offices have approaches to they're restoring some project work and some plaza work that is not being clear, and we've been talking to our students how to develop it. And yet again, we're also with Arjamil working with Factum Art and to do this new technology. How can you do without touching the building themselves? So we're seeing the best tool and to get our end results on how to use it. So I don't think there's a dilemma, and yet there's a lot of thirst. Yes, there's a lot of people who very much wanted to learn. And I think because there's a lot of institutions that focus on that, there's amazing initiative within the contemporary art, but within tradition, I think it needs to be looked at in a different way.
Hanan, what about the question of new building and what the relation of these traditional crafts is to that?
It's interesting to see that in the UAE. We've got the range of it. You could look at, for example, Sharjah, where they're rebuilding the Heart of Sharjah, the old traditional part, and they're very much going back to these traditional, coral, mud brick buildings and doing it in an authentic way. Maybe not to the extent of having a school, but reviving it traditionally. And then you have the extreme. You look at Satiate Cultural District. You look at Jean Nouvel's design of the Louvre Abu Dhabi, the use of geometry to create the light effects, and obviously the tools are much more digital and much more technologically advanced. But the inspiration for the architecture, especially of these cultural institutions, links back to some of the traditional aspects of Islamic architecture, but reinterpreted in a different way. The Louvre Abu Dhabi is really spectacular for doing that. The Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, Frank Gehry's design, looks at the wind towers, the Berjil, which are more from southern Arabia, and incorporates them, though, also in a contemporary way. So we're seeing it, but a lot of in the UAE, it's really as an inspiration, and then using technology to implement it with different materials and at a different scale. That's the other thing. Scale has really changed what you could do with traditional crafts into these types of public buildings.
Thank you both for really drawing. I'm going to have to bring this to a close because my train is leaving soon. You are all allowed to keep talking, and I'm sorry to interrupt because we really should have made this 3 hours, I realize. And it was really a fantastic drawing out, thanks to your question, of this difference really between craft and design and what that then means with contemporary tools. It's really it's different from innovating from the craft tradition, it seems to me. It's more about design in this case. Thank you. You've been a fabulous audience. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Noor, Ahmad, Aisha, and Hanan. Please give them a big hand.
Thank you, Mariët.